According to the National Deaf Children's Society, 1 in 5 preschool children have glue ear at any time, and 8 out of 10 children will experience glue ear before the age of 10. What is glue ear? Well, it just means they lose their ability to hear for a few months, and for severe cases, it can take up to a year for a child to be able to hear properly. During that time, some children loses their ability to communicate properly with their parents and their friends. Today, we are really, really excited to bring on the show a special guest, Tamsin Holland Brown. She's a pediatrician and a doctor by day and an entrepreneur by night. Tamsin specializes in medical conditions causing childhood hearing loss. So if you want to find out more about partial deafness and what glue ear is, then we are going to dive into that in a bit. Tamsin developed a device called glue ear that will help children during that severe period so that they can continue watching their favorite TV shows, communicate with their parents and their friends. Tamsin's research and experience of medical devices has helped and led to her becoming an educator in digital health and clinical entrepreneurship. She became a NHS England clinical entrepreneur herself for a few years before joining the leadership team running the program. So if there's anyone out there that you believe, wow, I'm a doctor, I work in the NHS and I want to jump into entrepreneurship, or I'm interested in deafness, whether partial deafness or full deafness, then this is the show for you. Welcome to the Mary Poppins of Startups live show. I'm Naili Makangu from Athena Leaders, an organization that is passionate about helping startups deliver complex projects and launch their products whilst leaving behind the legacy of a happy and performing workplace playground. For those who are new to the show, here's our quick reminder. Number one, make sure to get in touch with us, comment, whether you are watching it live or on replay, send us your messages, your questions, hashtag Athena Leaders. We will track down our guests on your behalf and they will answer any question that you might have. More importantly, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Tamsin, we've known each other for quite a few years, and what brought us together was actually the Deaf Awareness Week. This is something that I'm really passionate about, and I will share with the audience later on. But before we even start, I'm sure that there's a lot of people out there that never heard of glue ear, even just the concept of glue ear. If you can please start by letting us know what is glue ear and why you decided to create a device.
Oh, thank you, Naili, and just such a delight to see you and be with you today. So glue ear is probably what we've all experienced at some point, because you know when you get a really nasty cough or a cold and then you end up getting really quite blocked up, just generally, then sometimes you could have noticed that your hearing's bad, and it's, as adults, we're okay with it because actually our anatomy is quite big. And so we can drain that fairly effectively. We've learned to blow our nose, and so we can help get rid of it. But what it is just that fluid and mucus from a cough or a cold, which builds up behind the eardrum. And that affects the transfer of sound across to your inner hearing. But if you're a child and you've got small anatomy and you haven't really learned to blow your nose, and when you get blocked up, you get very blocked up. And for some children, they seem to be a little bit more prone to it. And exactly as you said at the beginning, Naili, this affects 80% of children at some point. For children, it's harder because as adults, if we don't quite hear what someone's saying, then we're not struggling to learn new words. We're pretty good at putting a sentence together. If we couldn't quite hear some of the sentence, our brain's pretty good at kind of working out what someone's talking about. But for children who are learning speech and language, they're learning social skills, they're learning how to attend to someone listening, then all of those skills can be affected by having glue ear. So it happens when children are young, when their anatomy is small. So it tends to affect children the most under the age of 8, really, 6, 7, 8 years old. And that's such a critical point in your development. Yeah. So that's the important bit. And I think that I probably, sorry.
No, no,
I
go
thought
for it.
I think because I work as a paediatrician,
Yeah.
and I also have this special interest in hearing loss, which is what joined us together, was that I was able to see that quite a few of these children who had glue ear and then glue ear again and then glue ear again, and that some of them were ending up in my paediatric clinics because people were asking questions like, is their learning okay, or is their have they got a speech and language disorder, or have they got difficulties with attention deficit? And I think what I started to see was some of those children ending up in my paediatric clinics, and I started thinking, hold on a second, how long are these children deaf for? And again, just like you said right at the introduction, you said that it can last up to a year, and that's exactly what we found. So is that actually for the kids where it's a bit persistent, and that fluid and mucus that's behind the eardrum is sitting there and actually getting a bit fibrous and sort of quite happy to sit there, that actually by the time our whole medical system is checking them and then giving it a chance to clear up and then checking them again and then thinking, okay, well, let's refer you to a specialist. By the time all of that happens, it actually takes about a year before the children are people are starting to think, actually, this is affecting you. Let's try and give you something. And it's not because people aren't working incredibly hard, because they are, but it's just that there isn't a solution at the beginning to try to help children with deafness when near the beginning of that process, and that sometimes kids really can fall behind quite significantly by the time there's getting some help. So that was what drove me.
Thanks, Tamsin, for explaining to us what glue ear is. Actually, I never even thought about it that way, and especially the fact that we also experience that as adults, but we naturally deal with that better than children. From a child's perspective, and as you've mentioned, some cases goes on for a really long time, from the moment they are referred to see a paediatrician all the way through undergoing the treatment. What is their experience at work, at school, or with their family?
Well, actually, the thing that I think that tipped me over into sort of this becoming a passion that I couldn't leave alone was that I've got a few children myself, and then one of my own children had it, and I was already concerned about it and looking at it, and then and looking at the numbers and realizing that some children actually had this hearing loss associated with this kind of gunk behind their eardrums for prolonged periods. And then one of my own children got glue ear, and I think that I then also got the patient perspective on that, and so I ended up then realizing that I could do more to help patients, because the amount of time, obviously, that you're seeing a clinician, and I was thinking about it so focused on the clinician side, but that for the vast majority of time you're between appointments and you're at home, and actually the children are then struggling, so they become quieter because it's difficult to interact. It's just a little bit harder because they're not completely deaf, they're just their hearing is reduced, so they tend to not catch the beginnings or the ends of words, or you don't quite catch that someone started talking, or when you start listening you're halfway through. Where's background noise, it's even harder to pick out any noise you're supposed to be listening to, which is pretty much most classrooms. So I started seeing all of that in my own kid while we were waiting, as you do, to see if it clears up, and going backwards and forwards for hearing tests, and then going to see a specialist to see if she needed anything else, and then realizing that actually there was very little that we were saying to parents or to children. Do you know what, this is what you could do in the meantime. And the wonderful thing about working with children is that they have a parent or a carer who's often very dedicated to what's happening with them, and so they're a wonderful group of children who have their carers built in. And not only that, they're a wonderful group who are very they're tech natives, and so they love being on a phone. And so just thinking about those bits and what we could do to support children more earlier, and when they're not in a medical setting. So what can they do at home? How can their parents be empowered to be the brilliant carers that they are? And so I think that's and then one of the things that I learned then from starting research in that area was that I hadn't realised the anxiety that children felt. So they're very worried about being told off. They think they go to school, they know that it's difficult to hear, or it's difficult to hear in one ear perhaps, or they've just had a cold and it's got worse, their hearing's got worse, and so they've had a cold and they've got a cold on a cold, as far as their ears are concerned, and they're very frightened about being told off, and they're also a bit frightened of not quite working out what's going on in the playground if there's lots of noise. And so that's something that I learned when I did the research, and so it was really interesting. And then the wonderful thing about doing research and giving children a device and saying, what do you think? What should we do? What do you think? When do you think this is useful? Is that actually children, just like adults, want to be empowered to manage their own health, like we all do. We want to, tell me, and they just said, oh, what I need it for is this, and they had a range of different reasons. They were better at connecting things than I was, and they taught me everything really about what needed to happen.
Yeah, so for those who've never seen the device, can you describe it? Is it a headset, or because I know there's also an app that comes with it?
Yeah, so initially there are some wonderful hearing aids that are out there, and hearing aids that, the behind the ear hearing aids that we're all very used to. That sort of works by sending sound through the ear canal, and which means that you sort of need to turn sound up. And one of the problems with this is that you could offer it to children with glue ear if their hearing stays down for a bit. But the problem is that because glue ear is fluid and mucus that's getting quite gluey and difficult, and sometimes it'll clear up and then you get another cold and then it gets worse again, so that your hearing goes up and down a bit. And so that's a real problem with hearing aids, because you've got to see an audiologist a lot to kind of program them to be right, and it's easy to get not enough, too little, and when you're doing hearing aids, so it's a little bit tricky. But there's this wonderful hearing aids that are already on the market that work by sending sound as a vibration. So if you capture sound, turn it into a vibration and send it across the bones of the skull, it actually reaches your inner hearing system, which sits in the bones of the skull, and which is actually what it does normally. Normally it goes across the eardrum, and the eardrum vibrates and sends the sound across. So instead, you've got a device doing it for you. But these devices are sort of thousands of pounds, and that's partly a barrier to offering it. So we tend to offer those particular devices to children waiting for operations, for example, or if children have a lot of additional needs. So they weren't being used routinely for glue ear. But and they're so expensive, and as you said, this is 1 in 5 children. By the time they start school, 1 in 10 children. So then that's when, at the time, this was the sort of bulky thing that I found initially, which was a sort of cyclists were using. And cyclists were using these connectors. So they would wear it like this, and of course it would not cover the ear canal. It sits in front on the cheekbone and turns sound into a vibration and sends it across. So cyclists were using it so that their ears were still open to hear traffic noises and to not get run over, but they could connect this to their phone, and this would just route round to their inner earring. So it's a bit like giving a cyclist 4 pairs of ears, because you've got whatever the sound is from this being routed round, and also the sound from your ears being routed. So cyclists were using these, and they were becoming a bit popular. And at the time, these were about £100. This is a little bit of a bulky one. They've become much better now, lighter and more funky. And so the cyclists were using them, but they were £100 or under £100. And I was just thinking, so what if we use those? Is that all right? Do they work? They use the same technology. They're tiny bit amount of the price. Would those do? And so I thought that other people would think I was crazy. So my first research study was done very quietly on a Sunday. Sundays, seeing children with glue ear and trialing these devices on them and seeing what they thought, and that's how it kind of started. And so now no, it's all very, we worked out by doing all the research what the devices needed to be helpful to children. We first of all worked out that it worked. That was amazing. And then what features they would need. And with this wonderful collaboration with Raspberry Pi, they've come up with these lovely headsets, which they do they sort of grow with the child if need be, or you can do different sizes using the arms. And also there's just a slightly bigger plate for the vibration to be sent over to the inner ear. And there's a lovely little light system which helps people who are with the child to know whether it's on or not, so that they can see if it's on. So those are the ones that we've developed. So we're trying to keep them nearer £50, and it comes with a little microphone that the teacher can wear if need be, so that the teacher can talk directly to the child and they can hear over that background noise, which makes hearing so difficult. So that's the device. And the aim there was that it wouldn't be necessarily used like a hearing aid. It was a sort of an assistive technology to say to children, if you're struggling in a certain situation, then help, you can hear better. And if that helps to, and of course, although the teacher, they might use it in a classroom with the microphone, and then when children told us about what they used it for, they were saying, actually, there are really difficult lessons like PE, where the teacher's far away, or there's phonics where you're supposed to hear those tiny sounds within the words. And so some of them would reserve it for certain lessons. And some of them would wear it for their class teacher during the day. We didn't say they had to take it to school, actually. They just, half of them took it to school. They decided to. But these headsets can connect just like we're talking now, and they connected for online learning. So we did a little research study in the pandemic when there were no grommet operations happening, to see whether we could support children's learning that way. And so that was one way, was can we help children hear? And then the other one was maybe we could just make a little app, and that could put some speech and language enrichment activities, kind of targeted activities for children, help them with their listening skills, maybe help them not to fall behind a little bit, and also some information for parents so that they were getting the right information regardless of where they were, so that it was more equitable. Because I think sometimes what happens can change in different parts of the country, can't it? And actually there's something about things being really even and the information being the same. So we got all our information from the really big sources like the National Institute for Clinical Excellence and Royal College of Paediatrics, and very importantly the National Deaf Children's Society, who are now collaborating on the app.
This is incredible, and I've honestly been really enjoying the explanation of such a complicated topics. And in fact, if you ever thought about presenting at things like BBC Bite Size or all of those educational shows where you break down complex issues in a way that's very, very interesting and enjoyable, I think you're the woman for the show. So if there's anyone looking for a presenter, I think they should just come and speak to you. I think that this device is fantastic. Sorry, Tamsin, you said something there, Katja.
No, I was just saying, I love always thinking about the next thing that could work, and what would be the next best thing, and coming up with brilliant ideas. It's always wonderful talking to you.
And for those who don't know, I've been following Tamsin for nearly 3 years now. I mean, back in 2017, I started running projects every year to support the Deaf Awareness Week. In the UK, it runs in May. And one thing I used to do was to highlight the charities that just support the deaf community. The reasoning behind that was very, very, very weird, actually. It was a December 2016, and for some reason I decided not to go home for Christmas. And it's between that time, between Christmas and New Year, where there's nothing to do, especially in a tiny but small town like Cambridge. And I was just doing my own thing and trying to just get out of my house. I spoke to a friend, and we realized that one of the theater next to us were putting a play about, I think it was Beauty and the Beast. We went to watch the play. It wasn't a massive production. It was a very small production, 3 actors, 1 scene, but it was very, very interesting. But there was 2 things that I never forgotten. First, Me and my friend were the only grown-ups there that didn't come with a child, right? So we turned up because we were desperate to leave the house. And the second one was the fact that they had a deaf interpreter, a sign language interpreter for the deaf community. That was mind-blowing for me, because especially back in the days, the only time you will see a sign language interpreter was on TV, usually during the day when most people are probably at school or at work, or late in the evening when most people are sleeping. That was the first thing. And secondly, I never even thought about the concept of having a sign language interpreter at events. And it really made me think, right? I was really bold that I was prepared to go anywhere, even to a play that was probably not suitable for my age. But if I'm someone who have some kind of hearing problem, hearing loss, the opportunity that you have to communicate and to be part of the society is very reduced. Taking Cambridge as another example, there are many talks about entrepreneurships, about technology, startups, but not many of them are actually done in a way that is friendly to a non-hearing audience. So I think this is really where my passion started, in terms of just, talking about it a bit more, so that the more people realize that, yes, this is happening, even for us that do not have hearing problems or do not have friends that experience the problem, it still exists out there. And whilst, in my journey and every year promoting an organization, that's how I see, I met Tamsin. And I can tell you that we're going to talk a little bit about your experience, because I saw your device really at the very early beginning. And when you were demoing it today, I was like, wow, you're working with Raspberry Pi. Before, you were just you and a few people. And now you have such a lot of support along the way. So if you take us back to the early few years when we first met, and you were talking about your experience about, you have children, you work as a doctor, and as you just said on the show as well, you have to find any time on a Sunday or trying to squeeze it in the evening. What has your experience been of just creating this device and bringing your vision into reality?
Yes, well, and I love what you just said there, Naily, about, it is a lot of adults, isn't it? Thinking about, how many people are affected by hearing loss. It's a huge amount as you get older and older, but also it's a huge amount of children. And I think that one of the things that is really kind of important to me as a paediatrician is to put in things that work, early interventions early, because for eyesight and hearing loss are the most common disabilities for children. And if you put in an early intervention, you can make a lifetime of difference, even if the difference is only that those children don't think that they're naughty or not very clever. So I think that I just so wholeheartedly agree with what you were saying there. But yes, when we first talked about it, I was really struggling 3 years ago, wasn't I? I was really struggling. I was naive. I didn't know what to do with the information. I didn't know about pulling people who had the same values as me together I didn't know about that. You were one of those first people for me who kind of we connected on a kind of values level. And I think I started to learn that. And I felt like I did everything wrong. And at the same time, hospitals are busy, and they are wanting you to see as many patients as possible. And so when you start thinking about doing something a bit kind of random, thinking outside the box and thinking, well, what happens if we do this? There's not a lot of time or space in your work time to have anyone really able to support you, because everyone's just so busy all the time. And so I think that I really struggled with that too, because I felt very on my own, which was why it was so lovely for you to reach out. That was really important for me. And I also had the kids at home. And then once I'd started, that meant that I had to do the research at the weekends, partly because there was no other time when I could do it. So then I was putting a lot on my family that I'd started this whole journey. And I think I naively thought that it would be like, oh, I'll do this and then it'll all be fine. And next year I don't know what I thought. I just thought, these things just have so many different facets to them, and so many different things fell through, and the research was painful and it took ages, and then publishing it took ages, and I think I burnt out a couple of times, from just trying to do things at midnight, that made the time being between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. was the time that I could sit down, really. And then I think that you start to find the people who are in the same space. That lovely talk that, when you spoke about finding fun in this journey was really important to me at the time. It's something that I still hold on to, about just actually, where's the joy? Because this is your life. So, that important bit. And then you start to find your tribe, I think. And it doesn't really matter what background you come from. So I come from medicine. I didn't know the first thing about anything to do with business or launching a product, and I still have tons to learn. But finding your tribe is the most important thing. And then there's the clinical entrepreneur program that's set up by NHS England brings together healthcare professionals who are in that space. And the wonderful thing about that is that you sit in the same room of people who are equally trying to do the same thing as you. And it's amazing. It's amazing to sit there in the same room as people who are, and have those conversations that you desperately need. So I think finding your tribe is really important. And then I had to sort of bring my children along with me on the journey. I needed to, once I'd done that first bit of research, I wanted to take it to a conference, and the only conference about glue ear was in Australia, and it happens once every 2 years. And I was thinking, I need to get there so that I can see if it works. Like, if I can see if other people think this is a good idea, or whether it's crazy and I should just leave it alone. And so I got offered. I applied to speak. They said I could speak for 12 minutes in Australia, and then I had to go home and say to my husband, I can't go without the kids because they're too little and I'll miss them, and we've all got to save up some money and go to Australia. And so he worked extra shifts, we both did, to try to get the money together to go to this one conference to see if other people thought this was a good idea or not. And then when we got there, people were like, oh, this is a great idea. And then, and we were paying back that loan for a long time, but it felt worth it. I needed to take the kids with me. So we had 5 kids aged 4, 6, 8, 10, and 12 on the plane coming with me to us.
Wow, the things that people do. Oh my God. We need to change the nature of movies about entrepreneurship that we see on Netflix, because they don't tell you about saving up to take an entire family, 5 kids, to Australia to attend a conference to validate the market for your product, right?
Exactly that. I know. I didn't know how to do it. And I even wonderfully spoke to the children's head teacher and said, I need to take them out of school. I'm really sorry. I know this is terrible, but I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to do this journey. And can you help me? She just went, oh. So it's other women were very important in my journey. And other women saying, yeah, you can do it. Yeah, that's too quick. Yeah, it's horrible with it, and just making you feel at home. I think making you feel at home instead of feeling like an outsider in doing something entrepreneurial, which is what I felt a bit at the beginning. I felt like maybe I didn't belong, and so I needed to see other people doing it.
Can you expand a bit on that? Because I think that's really something that I see. I see a lot, especially when we have those entrepreneurship days, or some people don't see themselves as entrepreneurs, or they don't see themselves as a business person until they've reached a certain milestone, and that actually plays with their mindsets and their own beliefs and their abilities throughout going through the journey. So how did you navigate through that from obviously the beginning where you felt like I don't belong to getting to the point where you are now, where you obviously sound like, you know, you've been through so many things that you feel like you are part of the community?
I think that, yeah, that's a really, really lovely question, I think, because no one has really asked me much about that before. But when I saw something that said, even before I met you, I think, Naily, where there was a day on where, and it said for clinical entrepreneurs, and I looked at what was on offer, the talks, and I thought, oh, I really need to know about that and that and that. But I wish I was a clinical entrepreneur. I wish I was an entrepreneur. That would be good, because then I could go. And so I absolutely did not see myself as that. And the language, I think, is important, isn't it? And it was another person that said to me, oh, I didn't see your name on the list. And it was as an email. And if they hadn't have done, I don't think I'd have ever even considered myself as being in that world. So it was someone said, I didn't see your name on the list. And I nearly fell off my chair that it was that someone considered me like it was all right to go. And I signed up. I was like, oh my gosh, this is me. And then that's I do remember that, because I want to pay that forward. That kind of, hey, this is you. This can be you. Why isn't it you? Of course it can be you. Why not? And people, I think some women say, well, you know, I'm an intrapreneur. I'm changing processes within my organization. That's equally as valuable. You are equally as valuable. Social entrepreneurs. I think maybe we need to find the right, and it's, for me, it was important. Like, men have been incredibly important in my journey too, but for me, it was really important to see, to speak to other women who were doing it. And I think that there's probably a million different reasons for that. But I needed people to say to me, it can be you, of course it can be you. And it took me a long time maybe to get to that. And you're right, it is nice to feel comfortable in that environment. And then it becomes really important to me to say to other people, of course this could be you. But I think sometimes there have just been so many pressures from so many different reasons. There's so many different reasons why we all feel that. And it, you know, parents, it's difficult for parents. It's difficult for anyone who feels like they maybe feel like they didn't see anybody else in that role to know that it would be okay. Yeah. So I didn't have that. I don't remember having that growing up, for example. But then I was born in the 70s, so there wasn't a lot of example of that. And even some of those questionnaires that look at your leadership roles, for example, Belbin, and they're all so insightful, but they have been generated at a time when there wasn't a lot of diversity in the workplace.
Yeah.
And so I just think that sometimes you have to think, sometimes I see people say, well, I've not got this leadership quality. And actually there's so many different leadership qualities, aren't there? There's so many different entrepreneurial qualities, leadership qualities, often all it is saying, that's your magic, the magic that makes you. That's important. That's what no one else has got. No one's you. And so you can do it your way, in your style, and you can get there if you want to. And actually, maybe the one wonderful thing about women's groups is that women are very good. I know that people can give examples of when women have not supported each other, but actually, generally, women are very good at coming together and supporting each other. And that's been a wonderful thing that's happened over the last 50 years, I think, for saying, you pulled me up and I want to pull someone else up, and say, hey, it's okay. We can have these conversations. It feels hard, but it's okay.
Yeah. I can definitely relate to that. And I absolutely love everything that you've said so far. And in fact, I think that especially there's in November is usually an entrepreneurship day or something like that. I'm just going to cut this bit where he says you can be an entrepreneur and just put it online, because I believe that there are so many people who don't appreciate themselves enough. And when you talked about the different facets of entrepreneurship, I know so many people, for example, my sister is an entrepreneur, but her and I have very different styles of entrepreneurship. I'm more of the risky one that will go in visionary, help my clients, work with startups, launch a podcast. Whereas she's more of a behind the scene entrepreneurs. She ran a lot of her own businesses in the past. But one thing that's starting to happen more and more is that people are coming to her for extra support so that she can bring everything together and pretty much run their operations and helps them as they grow. Yet she still struggles to see that as entrepreneurship because it's not what we see, like you were saying, on when you go online, right? Like you were saying earlier, it's not what people always talk about. So it's about understanding your strengths and how it shows differently to you as an entrepreneur than you would from someone else. And this idea of tribes and women coming together is also very, very exciting. In fact, later on today, I'm going to an event about entrepreneurs in the agriculture or agri-foods for women in Spain, in Madrid. And it's going to be very interesting as well, because, I was even thinking this morning, I'm not even in agri-foods, but I work a lot with EIT Food, which is an organization around Europe. They do a lot of work with Cambridge University, and I train at some of their leadership events as well. And they bring a lot of women entrepreneurs in the agriculture sector to, see what they can do together. And it's pretty much what you've said about what is also happening in the health tech. And I'm glad the NHS is also pushing that forward.
I think that's right. And I think I've seen people who would describe themselves as introverts just being superb leaders, superb speakers. The people who are quiet often foster a lot of trust. Like you were saying about your sister, people coming to her. I think that there's that kind of huge strength in that quiet, isn't there? And so I think that there isn't a type, and we do ourselves a disservice to think that there is a type sometimes.
Yeah. For anyone watching right now, and especially those who are worried about regulated environments, health tech is one of the most regulated environments. Some people say it's fintech, but I believe that health tech is there's so many more red tapes than you will face in other environments when it comes to building a product. So how did you navigate around funding to help yourself grow and also manufacture different prototypes for your products?
Yeah, another great question. I really struggled at the beginning because I worked as a doctor, but I wasn't an academic. And I was thinking, when you apply for a lot of the kind of medical type style of funding, you have to be within a kind of academic institution. So they want to see on your funding forms that you've got a professor and you've got your team, and that's important. And also, it was the first time I was really looking at doing some research because I've now done 4 research studies, but each time I needed to answer a question. Will this tech work well? Will it work well enough? What do the children think of it? What do the parents think of it? How does it work at school? I needed to know the answer to those questions. But the academic world was quite difficult because they were like, oh, well, you're not an academic. And I was thinking, well, I need to be, because I need to start doing this work. So I need to find out the answers to this question. And so initially I failed at getting big funding streams and ended up getting much smaller. It was easier for me to follow up with smaller charities who were kind of aligned with the vision, and so I did smaller and smaller, and then also maybe that made me braver as well. And then actually, by the time you've published some papers and you've got yourself to these conferences, then people are starting to think of you as academic. Interestingly, it was another conversation where someone said to me, by the way, you're an academic paediatrician. I mean, again, I wouldn't have known these things unless people tell me, honestly. And then you've got to believe it after someone tells you, and that takes a bit longer, doesn't it? And then you get that confidence and you've got your team together better, and to apply for more funding. You watch other people do it. Again, I was helped enormously by. We're lucky in Cambridge because we've got this lovely network. I don't know, maybe it happens everywhere, but I feel like there's this wonderful network of people who will look at your funding forms for you and try and get bits of funding. When I did the over COVID, wanted to do a very fast research study because I didn't know how long COVID was going to go on for. But I could see that all the kids that were waiting for a grommet operation, which is simply an operation to drain that fluid from behind the ear and then leave a tube in place so that across the eardrum to keep that fluid drained and to help the child to hear. Although grommets fall out after sort of somewhere between 6 and 18 months, so they only last for a certain period of time. But as soon as it was announced that those operations were not happening anymore, then I thought, well, I could do a research study to see if we could support these children. And actually what happened was we could support their hearing whilst their glue ear naturally resolved, because it will naturally resolve in most instances. It's just that if you've got a hearing loss and it goes on for a long time, you've got to do something to sort out the hearing loss. But what we were able to do over COVID was do that study. Now that I needed to get off the ground straight away, and I almost didn't have time for funding. And then Raspberry Pi said, all right, we'll give you the equipment. And so I just ran it without any funding.
Wow.
And we just supported these families entirely remotely, followed them up remotely. And they did their learning. They used the headsets for learning online, and then as the schools opened up, they took them back to school. By the time grommet operations opened up again, some of the glue ear had resolved, but they had had the hearing support for that period of time.
Yeah.
So yes, I again, maybe just as you're on your journey, then you get a little bit braver and a little bit braver. I think when I first met you, I was saying, you know, every day I'd think, well, I'm still here, you know, it's still happening. Felt like it, and maybe you always feel like it might fall over tomorrow, you know, you never know. But then the whole journey changed my career, and I learned so much about what was possible, I guess. Yeah. So I wouldn't, even if it all fell over, it was still worth it. You know, even if the whole thing fell over tomorrow and never, you know, it would. I'm now in a position to support other people. I've now learned lots. I know that you can do hard things, that you can, you know, I've learned those bits that have made me grow as a person. So yeah. I think that it's still been useful, still been of value. Met you.
Oh, thank you. And I met you as well. I think you brightened my day, and I think you're one of the things I look forward to in May, just so that I can shout out about what you're doing. I do admire your tenacity, and I'm sure that anyone listening right now are also feeling the same. Your courage, your humility, and your sense of determination, right? I'm going to get there. We are going to Australia. We'll figure out how. We are going to run this. We are going to bootstrap, you know, building this on top of my job. And I believe I mean, as an entrepreneur, you are the perfect example of someone who's just following their passion and really, really want to do something good for the community. I do hope a lot of other people are also inspired, despite, you know, everything that happened in the journey, to follow you. One thing that I also want to just get through you, because we've heard so much about your pains, you know, and how you've converted those painful moments into who you are today and what ear glue is today. Is there a moment where you just wanted to scream for no particular reason because you've reached a milestone and thought, yes, this is it, I'm on the right track?
Oh, yes. I mean, those moments, which are often, you're so right, you know, when you're just on your own and you have a phone conversation, and like, for example, the National Deaf Children's Society is the biggest, you know, charity that supports children. We use in our clinics, we use all of their material. And so I think, you know, I remember doing exactly that, you know, when they sort of went, well, we were thinking that we might sort of collaborate with you on the app and join you, and, you know, we could add our name to it, and we could make sure that we keep it free for children. And I think that I'd had one of those moments, you know, where about 2 weeks before that, where I thought, I don't think I can do this. I don't think I can keep it free. I don't know what I was thinking, you know. Nothing runs for free, but I wanted it to be free because of health equalities. Then the minute you charge, you often means that the families who need it most can't access it. And so I had that one of those, you know, evenings where you sit on the stairs at 2 o'clock in the morning, crying into a cup of tea, thinking, I don't think it's going to work. And then the National Deaf Children's Society are on the phone saying, yeah, I think we need to support the app. And then you think, I did do that bit exactly that you were talking about, Naily, where you kind of like finish the conversation, run out into the corridor. There's absolutely nobody else there, and you do a kind of like a oh my goodness, made it. And it was, I mean, it took probably about 2 years to kind of formalize that. So it took a long time, but it's just been wonderful. You know, I think you're right. They're an important body themselves, and we all respect that. And so for them to respect what I was doing, I think that was a really important moment. Yeah. Oh, Naily, I think you're...
Yeah, so it's beautiful watching your face right now. And as you were describing this moment, as an entrepreneur, we spend so much time. Well, something good happened, right? Yes, it happened, move on. But it's nice to kind of remember those moments to give you the energy to go forward. And it's nice. Thanks for sharing those with us on the show. So just before we finish, where are you going now with Ear Glue Ear? Because right now you definitely have a validation. It's something that works. It helps a lot of families out and children out there, even during the pandemic. You are working with big organizations, including the Raspberry Pi and more on your lovely ideas. Things are going well. So where do you see yourself taking Ear Glue Ear as part of this continued growth?
I think at the moment I'm just on an NHS Innovation Accelerator to help start to scale that across the NHS a bit more, and also I think something that's been really incredible has been the reach out from people and academics who are working in countries where, particularly the global south, or countries with sort of less robust systems where children sort of they don't have that intervention, they can't get the surgery or the grommets at any point. So looking for some early intervention that's affordable, and so starting to look at and to have conversations with countries or deaf schools in Rwanda, Malawi, and South Africa, and starting to kind of think about what might be able to be possible for people who can't have access to support, because again, for them it changes what they're able to do for their life trajectory, because if they're struggling at school and you have to pay for school, then you for example, for some of those children, they change over to physical work instead, so it changes what they're doing. And for some of the children who have constantly runny ears, we don't tend to see it that much in this country, but chronic infections, again, you can't hear, but you can't even wear a hearing aid if you can get one, because you've got this infection coming out of your ear. And but if you can wear something like this, which sits in front of the ear, so it doesn't matter, let that pus drain out, but you can still assist hearing. So there's now been some wider conversations, and that's been really exciting, I think, to feel like we could support more than just the patients that I was worried about that were sitting in front of me.
Wow, that's fantastic. What a journey you're on. And I'm sure that most of my listening, I know what you're thinking. Yes, next year we're bringing Tamsin back on the show to find out what it's been a year on from now. So if I'm a parent right now and I want to get my hands on Ear Glue Ear, or I want at least to consider that as an option for my child who's currently expecting or waiting for treatment, how can I do that?
Well, the app is free. And it's called Ear Glue Ear, and it's three words, and it's available to download on the Apple or the Android store now. And so mostly audiologists will recommend, or ear, nose and throat surgeons will recommend, that patients just download that once they've got a diagnosis. And so we because of the collaboration with the National Deaf Children's Society, we want to keep that free. And then we've got a website, hearglueear.co.uk, and the wonderful raspberry Pi lot. We've had a lot of complications because of COVID, but that then it'll all be these will be available probably on the Raspberry Pi site as well as through the website. So we'll try and make it as available to as many people as we can.
Fantastic. Well, just before we head off, there's one question that's come through, and we might as well just pop it up on the screen for you to go live. The question is this: I have imposter syndrome and I deal with loneliness, as it can just feel like it's just you in your business. What was a pivotal point in your development and bringing people into your startup?
God, that's a great question. It does feel very lonely. I mean, that's normal, I think. That feeling like, that feeling like you're on your own, because there's that wonderful quote. I think that it started with Gandhi, and then Tony Benn, the MP, ended up saying that first of all, people think you're crazy, and then people think you're dangerous. And so there's this kind of awful point where you are very lonely at the beginning. And I think that knowing that other people go through that is really important, isn't it? And then you get to a point where no one disagrees with you, which is what Gandhi said. And I think that it's so true. And actually, I definitely had my fair share of people being really quite skeptical at the beginning, and sort of, and it hurts you, and you do feel that it makes you feel more on your own. So I think it goes back to nearly what we were saying about finding your tribe. I think it's about connecting, like, even listening to podcasts where you can go, okay, that's kind of part of it. And also just to believe that you are absolutely in the right place where you are, and you can grow it. It's normal to be at the beginning where everyone thinks you're crazy or dangerous, because you're thinking about pushing the status quo. And there's this huge bias towards the status quo. It doesn't matter how dangerous it is. Everyone's brains are wired to stick with the status quo. So they hate it when you go outside your box. But I think that if you're feeling a bit lonely and you've got imposter syndrome, then you're absolutely on the right track. Because that's exactly, then you're thinking outside the box. You're the one person who dares to do that. So you want to stick with that and find more people who are in your tribe. Connect with Naily.
Definitely. I'm happy to have a chat with you online, offline, or anything, just to help you go through this time. And again, something that Tamsin mentioned earlier in the show, I do advise to go back and watch it if you've missed that, was to attend other entrepreneurs events and just ask questions, and believe in what other people are telling you about yourself, because that came later. Remember what you said earlier, Tamsin, when people ask you to join a clinical entrepreneurship, and you thought, I'm not a clinical entrepreneur, but you just went with it. And I feel like a lot of people sometimes want to see things happening first, things being concrete, before they can even start believing it. And if you're not there yet, do use other people's belief in you as a way of pushing you forward. And in fact, if there's anyone else want to understand a bit more this idea of finding your tribe, and you are struggling about creating this community, do watch the episode that we've had just before this one with Mike Pagan on mental wealth, because we talked a lot about mastermind, finding your tribe, and how you can do that in more details. But thanks again for the amazing question. So Tamsin, before we go, just one final question for you. What has been your own drive and personal motivation that wakes you up every single morning?
Yeah, that's also a good question. I think that I felt like I was in this position where I was kind of lucky enough to be in the kind of medical. I knew that some of these kids were struggling over here, and I knew that I'd seen it. I knew that it was right. That somehow some of these kids needed earlier support. I mean, it's not rocket science, is it? Just if you can't hear, then it'll help you to have better hearing. If a child couldn't see, we wouldn't send them, even if they couldn't see for 6 months or a year, we'd give them some glasses to go to school with. And I think that children just believe that the world is just as it is. They don't think to say, I can't hear very well, because they think that everybody can hear to that level. And it's never a priority, because children don't vote. It's never a priority to do children's health. And I know that when you see this research and the amount of money that goes into, wonderful and important research around tiny little bits and pieces. And yet if we don't champion children to have early intervention and to be well supported early, then we can make a whole lifetime of difference. Every pound makes a huge difference when it's applied to child health. And we need them to grow up and believe in themselves, because they've got a lot to do, haven't they? And I've got 5 kids, and I saw one of them struggle with that. She was trying to keep up. It was too difficult. And you think, well, there's 1 in 5 is like that. So we've got to do something as parents and as human beings. And so I think I felt like it just needed to be that maybe if I didn't do it, no one else would do it.
Wow. Yeah. That's definitely a reason that's worthy of just jumping out of bed every morning. And as I've said before many times privately and on the show, I really admire what you do. And I really, I really love Deaf Awareness Week, or I just think about this as Deaf Awareness Month at this point. And for anyone who's out there thinking, how can we build a more inclusive society, and how can we help the deaf community, then really look into sharing this message, because there's so many people out there that might not even be aware that there is a solution that can reduce a child's loneliness and even anxiety that we talked about earlier on. Thanks again for being a fantastic guest to the show.
Lovely. And, thank you so much.
Yes, my pleasure. And for anyone watching out there, please do remember, let's design a happy and productive workplace playground together.